Choosing the right lens can be a daunting task, especially if you're new photography or you just can't be bothered to buy, try, regret, sell, and then buy again. Well, I've done the hard work for you, and in this video I'm going to show you what, in my opinion, is the best Fujifilm lens kit that covers pretty much every single scenario. Not only will I speak about each lens individually, but we'll also combine them into lens sets for specific purposes, so stay tuned for that one. Without any further ado, I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and let's get into the details. Like any gear video, you first need to know who you're taking the device from. Now, I've been using Fujifilm systems since 2018, and during that time, I've used pretty much every single lens that they make. Now, this kit has stood the test of time, and for well over a year, I have not come across a scenario where I didn't have a lens or a combination of lenses to do the job. As a full-time travel photographer, these lenses have seen everything, from the hot desert to the mountain peaks to the pouring rain and to the busy streets of Istanbul. These are not cabinet trophies, they are tools, and they show it. Now, in this video, you're not going to get any pixel peeping or zooming in into a brick wall. Instead, you're going to get a real-world opinion based on thousands and thousands of hours of use in pretty much all conditions. Finally, a very important point. You don't need any of these lenses to take good photos. As a matter of fact, later on in the video, I will suggest cheaper, smaller, and even lighter alternatives to these lenses. Please keep in mind, I do this full time. My income depends on this. Therefore, I can justify spending more to get the better quality equipment. But for most people, they don't need anything that expensive. However, the methodology in terms of the particular lens type will carry over. First things first, let's get some common attributes out of the way. All of these lenses are weather sealed and have linear focus motors. Weather sealing is an obvious one, and linear focus motors do perform better in video. This kit is designed to be multi-purpose and multifunctional. So what I mean by that is there isn't a single lens which only has one purpose. Each lens can serve 2 or 3 different purposes depending on what I want to do. All of these lenses have been very reliable. I've not actually had any issues or malfunctions with these lenses. The only time I had to send them back to Fuji was for either general servicing or because I've done something stupid and I got them covered in sand or whatever. I'll mention that later, but all I want to say is that I've not had a single reliability or build quality issue with these lenses. Let's begin with primes, and I have two, the 33mm f1.4 and the 18mm f1.4. Both of these are the later generation primes, and I have to say are some of the sharpest lenses that Fuji has made. Although bigger and slightly heavier than the f2 or even the older f1.4 counterparts, I don't think they're that big or heavy or out of place on any Fuji body. They will work just as well with an XH2 as well as an XT30 or an XE4. Aside from the sharpness, the general image quality, the color rendering, and the look and feel of these lenses, in my opinion, is fantastic. So much so that I can attribute around 80% of my street photography over the last year to these two lenses. If I had to pick a fault, I would say that the aperture ring on the 18mm is noticeably easier to move compared to the 33mm. This has resulted in me knocking it by accident when it was in my bag, or if I'm just carrying it around, going to take a photo thinking that I'm in f4 and then ending up at f8 or f1.4. At this price point, at this level, you'd think there'll be some consistency between the 33 or the 23 or the 18, so it's a little bit disappointing, but it's not the end of the world. Moving over to zooms, let's first look at the 16-55 f2.8. If someone said to me, you're only allowed to keep one lens and sell everything else, this is the lens I would keep. That focal range is the most useful in my opinion. Some people say it's boring, but honestly, 16-55, or if we're looking at full frame terms as a traditional 24-70, covers everything. You have your wide angle for architecture and establishing shots, you have your mid-range for your subject shots, for your street photography, and then you have your 55mm to get details of the scene. Honestly, with this one lens, you can pretty much shoot anything, anywhere. Although not as sharp as some of the other lenses in this kit, the overall image quality is very good, the color rendering is good, and I do believe that there is a certain look to this lens. However, the highlight for me is just how bulletproof this lens is. I've had it for over 4 years. It's been used in torrential rainstorms, Twice when I used this lens, the camera died because of water ingress. However, the lens was fine, including both taking a wave when I was on a boat, shooting a rainstorm multiple times. I've never had any issues. I've even dropped this lens in the sand in the desert in Dubai. I was running down the sand dune, fell over because I was being an idiot, and as I landed, I went kind of camera first into the dune. So much so that you physically couldn't move the lens or any of the aperture dials because it was full of sand. I got back, I didn't use the lens, I got back home, sent it to Fuji, they've rebuilt it, and it's now as good as new. Finally, considering everything, the size and the weight is not too bad. I think on an XT or an XH body, it's perfect. On some of the smaller bodies like the XE or the XT30, it might be a little front heavy, but I think it's still doable. Next up, we have the 50-140 f2.8. Now, I think it's a bit of a niche lens given the size, weight, and cost. However, the image quality, the sharpness, which I think is one of the sharpest, if not the sharpest lens that Fuji make, apart from the 90, but for a zoom anyway, the sharpness and the general image that you get at the end is one of the best. Personally, I love the internal zoom function, which makes it a little bit less prone to having dirt or dust or sand get into the lens. Just like the 16-55, it has been used in pretty much every scenario, and I've not had any issues. If I had to point to a negative about this lens, it would be the very cheap and nasty lens hood. Normally, Fuji lens hoods are not too bad, but whoever designed it for this lens obviously was like about to quit because the actual lens hood is so cheap and flimsy, it's very difficult to get on and off. It's not smooth, it catches. So much so that, as you can see, it has worn away the paint on the thread on the lens for the lens hood. So it's definitely very disappointing considering how expensive this lens is. However, if that's the only negative, it's not the end of the world, in my opinion. The last thing to keep in mind is this lens is definitely more suitable for the bigger bodies, specifically the XT or the XH. If anything, it feels better on the XH than it does on the XT due to the bigger grip. This lens is very, very heavy. It's very front heavy. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially if you plan on walking around with it for a long time. And the final zoom is the 8-16 f2.8. Now, this is extremely niche, and right off the bat, I would say that for 99% of people, the 10-24 f4 is going to be a better lens and will do 90% of what the 8-16 can do just as well. For most people, the 8-16 is not going to be very practical. It's extremely expensive, as I've said, it's big, it's very heavy, and it doesn't take any filters at all. However, if you want the best possible image quality out of a wide angle lens, this is the one you go for. The general distortions are kept to a minimum, the lines are generally very straight, and the image is overall quite sharp. Sure, the corners can go a little soft, especially at 8 or 10 mil, but in general, considering how wide it is, I've been very impressed with it. If I had to pick a fault with this lens, I would say that the focus ring is very, very loose, noticeably looser. Is that a word? Looser? I think it is, compared to the 16-55 or the other lenses. Okay then, so far I've been talking about the technical aspects of these lenses. Now let's talk about the practical application, specifically what lens I use for what purpose and why I think that lens is good for that purpose. And this is where we'll split the lenses into smaller lens sets. At this point, I would like to thank the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. Squarespace is my main portfolio where people come to see my best work. I have full control of how my work is presented and interacted with. Squarespace is also the hub for my business, my newsletter, and my travel photography blog. Finally, I use Squarespace as my social media landing page and my digital business card. Whether you're a beginner or a pro, having your own website is never a bad idea. So if this is something that interests you, click the link below to get a free trial followed by 10% off your first purchase. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring, and thank you for watching. Let's start with street photography, and it's a combination of the 18 and the 33mm f1.4. The 18mm obviously covers a much bigger area, and this is what I use for my establishing shots when I want to show the viewer everything that I'm looking at. It's also very handy in tightly packed areas, dense markets, and anywhere where there's not much room to move around. Also, it's a fantastic focal length to make the viewer feel like they're there with you. A longer focal length can sometimes make the viewer feel like they're a fly on the wall, With the 18, they're going to feel like they're right there within the action with you. And I use that lens quite a lot, but not as much as the 33. The 33 allows you to just hang back a little bit, observe what's happening, take your time and take the photo. You don't have to be right in the middle of the action. You don't need to get uncomfortably close to people or to whatever it is that you're taking photos of. And for me, it's just how I prefer to shoot. So when you combine these two together, you're going to cover, I would say, 95% of what you would encounter in a street environment. But also you can use these for other things. You can use the 18mm for environmental portraits where you want to include the whole person. The 33 though will be a more traditional portrait lens. Both of these lenses can equally be fantastic for architecture and for cityscapes. One will get the entire scene, the other one will pick a few interesting details. Now let's look at the minimal travel kit. So when I say minimal travel kit, I mean you're traveling with just one backpack, you want one body, a very simple system. For this, I'll bring the 16-55 and the 33 prime. Most of the time you will be using the 16-55 because, as I've mentioned earlier, this lens covers pretty much everything that you will encounter. And also, as you're always moving around, you don't know if you're going to be in a tuk-tuk or if you're going to be on a bus or if you're going to be in a market or in a field somewhere, I don't know, right? But by having this lens, you're never having to worry about changing lenses or changing different primes. You're always ready to take a photo and you're not going to miss any opportunity. However, you then have the 33mm prime, which serves two purposes. First of all, it creates a smaller and lighter kit. So maybe you don't want to walk around with a big zoom one evening. You want to walk into a market, or maybe you want to go somewhere that's a bit more intimate and you want to blend in a little bit more. But also being f1.4, it serves as a low light lens. So if you do go out at night, you have an option to get slightly cleaner looking photos in low light. Now, I must admit, I don't do nowhere near as much landscape photography as I'd wish. However, whenever I do it, I only go for two types of focal length. I go for either really wide to establish the scene, get the foreground involved and just show the viewer everything, or I go for a telephoto and just pick out interesting details within the environment. I don't often resort to that kind of mid-ground that I would use for street photography for landscapes. So for this, I would use the 8-16 and the 50-140. Now, if you say, oh, that seems very heavy and very big, I can actually swap out the 8-16 for the 18mm prime and have a slightly lighter kit. Finally, we have the YouTube and the video kit. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, all of these lenses are fantastic for video. The focusing is great, no real issues to complain about. However, if I had to pick a few specific lenses, I would do this. So the 8-16 is my talking head on a locked tripod B-roll lens. I wouldn't necessarily go out and vlog with it because it's a little bit too big and too heavy for that. If I want to spend time outside vlogging, I might use the 18 f1.4. Sure, it's a bit of a tighter crop, but it's just so much easier on the arm if I have to do that kind of stuff. Now, if I'm doing general B-roll in London or wherever I am, the 16-55 is a clear winner because, as I've said earlier, you're covering a wide range of focal length, which means you can just show the same scene in different ways, which will make the video a little bit more interesting. Okay, before wrapping up, let's quickly touch on a few accessories. The first one is the 2x teleconverter. It can be very useful to get very unique images like the one of the moon that you're seeing right now. I don't use it all that often, but now and again, it can be great. Next up is a polarizer. We all need a polarizer. Say need, you don't need a polarizer, but it can be useful for reflections, glare, that kind of stuff. And finally is a variable ND filter. I'll be honest, I don't use that very much at all, but now and again, especially when shooting in places like in Dubai in the desert, this is definitely very useful. As amazing as these lenses are, as I've said earlier, they're not for everyone. As a matter of fact, they're not for most people. 99% of people can get away with the cheaper, lighter and smaller alternatives. Now, I'm not saying don't buy these. If you have the disposable income, if this is your profession, by all means do so, but just don't feel like you have to buy them in order to get good images. So let's go through some alternatives. Instead of the 18mm f1.4, I would look at either the 16 f2.8 or the 23 f2, depending if you like slightly tighter or slightly wider. Instead of the 33 f1.4, I'd go for the 35 f2. 16 to 55 f2.8, you can easily swap that out for the 16 to 80 f4. Now you can go for the 18 to 55, but it's not weather sealed, so in my opinion, it's not really even a contender. The 50 to 140 can be easily replaced by the 70 to 300, and you actually get more reach anyway, and you can use that with a teleconverter to get even more reach. And finally, swap out the 8 to 16 for the 10 to 24, especially the new one because it's weather sealed and has a proper aperture ring. Okay, that's all from me, but before I close the video, I want to hear your thoughts. What lens setup kit do you use? What do you think of this lens setup kit? Do you think I have something that is unnecessary, or maybe I can optimize it? Personally, I love optimizing, I love minimizing, I love having as little kit as possible, yet still be able to do everything. So if you do think of an idea of how I can condense it even more, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Other than that, that's all. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. If you can hear a loud bike outside, I do apologize. And until the next one, see you later. Bye.